Greetings, thank you for lending an ear to the voice of the times for Wednesday, September 22, 2021. For today's editorial, goodbye to WB, doing business rankings and good riddance. In a statement issued last week, the World Bank announced that it has formally decided to discontinue its annual Doing Business report. We cannot imagine there will be many who will mourn its passing. We certainly do not. The Doing Business report was published annually from 2003 to 2020 by the World Bank Group and ranked countries, 190 of them in the most recent and last installment of the series on the ease of doing business within their jurisdictions. Countries were assessed on a number of metrics that were about evenly divided between data indicators and responses to surveys of business stakeholders, with the results generating a score between 0 and 100. For what it's worth, in the final Doing Business 2020 report, the Philippines was ranked 95th out of 190 countries with a score of 62.8. This was a significant improvement over its 29 rank of 124 with a score of 57.68, an outcome that the government did not fail to publicize with as much or more vigor than it had complained about the Philippines' ranking in the past years, which was often, as the Philippines typically was ranked rather low among the world's economies. The Doing Business report was always somewhat controversial and was the target of constant criticism, usually from countries like the Philippines, whose scores and rankings were much lower than they thought they ought to be. Developments in mid-2020 seemed to support many of the report's critics when questions about data irregularities about the 2018 and 2020 version of the report were raised internally within the bank. An external auditor was engaged in January of this year to investigate the concerns that had been raised. In a report released on September 15, it was found out that there were numerous instances of manipulation of the Doing Business report's data, mostly in connection with the rankings of certain countries that have a significant stake in the World Bank Group. The World Bank's board acted on the findings swiftly, issuing a statement just 2 days later that read in part, after reviewing all the information available to date on doing business, including the findings of past reviews, audits, and the report the bank released today on behalf of the Board of Executive Directors, World Bank Group management has taken the decision to discontinue the Doing Business report. Going forward, we will be working on a new approach to assessing the business and investment climate. Irregularities aside, there always seemed to be something just a bit off about the Doing Business report. Hard data indicators are not controversial, but the survey portion of the scoring model did not inspire much confidence, even if the indicators it generated were favorable. In the case of the Philippines in particular, the survey sample was typically unrealistically selective, although more than 99% of the nation's business are micro, small, and medium enterprises. These were always underrepresented, with the survey seemingly favoring large business stakeholders and academia. While we would assume these respondents would consider the broader business climate in giving their views, their perspective is not the same as stakeholders who are actually part of the MSME sector, and thus any conclusions drawn might differ considerably from on-the-ground reality. A broader flaw in the Doing Business report, which is an unfortunate characteristic of all such global rankings, is that it was very much based on a Western set of ideals. Granted, many of the indicators of ease of doing business, such as consistent and efficient regulation, reliability of legal systems, and competitive tax and incentive regimes, are universal. Within those indicators, however, there can be an infinite variety of country-specific nuances that can make a country's investment climate more or less attractive based on local conditions, even if the indicators differ considerably from some assumed norm. These details are necessarily lost in a global ranking that attempts to compare countries to some universal baseline, with the result very likely being inaccurate, unfairly critical, or unfairly complimentary to the country in question. And that's the editorial for Wednesday, September 22, 2021. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to its digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram and listen to the Voice of the Times.